Every morning starts the same way. I wake up at 6:30 without an alarm clock, pull on a worn robe, and go to make coffee. For 45 years in a row, I've gotten up at the same time, even on weekends, and now, 7 years after retirement, my body refuses to change the routine. Betty always laughed about it, called me a clock man. Eugene Kennedy wouldn't be late even for his own funeral, she used to say. Betty passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and relentless. When she died, many expected me to crumble. Our neighbor Rick Pettigrew even offered to move in with him for a couple of weeks, but I declined. At 72, I'm not about to become someone else's burden. Never have been and never will be. I stir my coffee and look out into my backyard. The grass is neatly trimmed, the hedges are trimmed. Not a single weed has dared to appear in my flower beds. Some people think that after retirement, life ends, but I've simply reallocated my energy. Instead of designing electrical systems for high-rise buildings, I now design my day into clear, manageable segments. Across from my chair on the wall hangs an electrical engineering diploma and several frames of thank you notes from major construction companies. For 40 years, I have designed electrical systems for office buildings, apartment complexes, and industrial facilities. My systems have never failed, not once. That's something I'm proud of. The phone rings at 9 o'clock sharp. It's Rachel Hampton, my neighbor, who's been looking after me since Betty passed away. She's 68, a widow, and makes the best blueberry muffins in Bridgeport. Every Sunday, she brings me 2 fresh muffins and insists I eat them in front of her. "Good morning, Eugene," she says in her melodious voice. "Have you had breakfast yet?" "Rachel, I eat breakfast at 7:15 every morning, and you know it." She laughs, having gotten used to my directness. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to go to the farmer's market with me. I need a man to help me shop." "It's Tuesday," I replied. "On Tuesdays, I check my bills and pay my utilities." "Eugene Kennedy, you're the most stubborn person I know," she sighs. "Okay, how about Saturday?" "I can do Saturday," I agree. 9 o'clock? 9, she confirms and hangs up. I go back to my coffee, which is already cold. There's a picture on the kitchen table from 35 years ago of me, Betty, and our daughter Abigail. Abigail was 12 then, and she was still smiling when I walked into the room. Now, at the age of 47, she barely dignifies me with a phone call on Christmas and Father's Day. I wasn't the perfect father, it's true. I worked 6 days a week, often staying late. But it was the reason we had our own house, 2 cars, and college money for Abigail. I never understood why she thought I should have spent more time at home playing dolls with her when someone else should have been earning money for those very dolls. By 11, I'm done with paying the bills. Everything is organized in folders, all the receipts filed. I pull out my expense book and carefully record each payment. Betty has always made fun of my habit of keeping paper records in the computer age, but I don't trust electronics when it comes to money. Paper doesn't glitch or crash. The doorbell catches me off guard. Visitors rarely show up on a weekday. I open the door and see Alfred the letter carrier with a large envelope. "A registered letter, Mr. Kennedy," he says. "Sign here." I sign and take the envelope. It bears the logo of Willie and Associates, a law firm I've never done business with. Inside is a letter informing me that my late brother Charles's daughter, Audrey, has appointed me as her executor. Charles died 15 years ago, and I've only seen Audrey a few times since then. The last time was at Betty's funeral. The letter throws me out of sorts, but I follow my routine. At noon, I make a light lunch, turkey and salad, a glass of milk. At 1 o'clock, I start work in the garden. Today, I'm pruning the roses Betty planted along the south wall of the house. I've kept her garden the way it was when she was alive. It's my tribute to her memory. At 3 in the afternoon, the phone rings. I take off my gardening gloves and go into the house. Abigail's name pops up on the screen. It's unusual. She rarely calls in the middle of the week. "Hi, Daddy." Her voice sounds strained. "How are you?" I'm fine, I answer. Did something happen? She laughs, but there's no joy in her laughter. Why do you always think something's wrong? Can't I just call my dad? You can, of course, I say, but you usually don't, especially on Tuesday afternoons. There's a pause. I hear her sigh deeply. Hugh lost his job, she finally says. His firm laid off an entire department. Hugh Taft, my brother-in-law. The financial analyst who always looked down on me as if my job as an engineer was something lowly compared to his high finance. I never told Abigail, but I didn't like Hugh from day one. Too smooth, too cocky. Money makes money, Eugene, he told me once at a family dinner, as if he were sharing great wisdom with a redneck. I'm sorry to hear that, I say, though I'm not really sorry. Has he found something new yet? Not yet, her voice trembles. And that's not all. Remember when we bought a house in that new neighborhood last year? We couldn't make the mortgage payments anymore. The bank started foreclosure proceedings. I'm sitting in the chair. Abigail and Hugh have always lived beyond their means. New cars every 3 years, expensive vacations, private school for their son Christian. I tried to warn them, but no one would listen. What are you going to do? I ask. We're thinking of renting an apartment, she says, but that requires the first and last month's rent, plus a deposit. And we're having cash flow problems right now. I see where she's going with this. The money. She's calling me for money. How much do you need? I'm asking her straight up. Dad, I don't... She stops. We just thought maybe you could lend us some to get us through this period. Hugh is sure he'll find a new job soon. How much, Abigail? $5,000, she says quietly. We'll pay it back as soon as we can, I promise. 5,000. I have that money. I have a lot more than that. I've always been thrifty, always saving. For a rainy day, as Betty used to say. It seems that day has come for Abigail. I'll think about it, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. Daddy, please. Her voice trails off. We really need help. We have Christian. He needs a stable place to live. Christian, my grandson, a 15-year-old I've seen maybe 10 times in his life. Through no fault of my own, Abigail rarely invited me to visit, and when I offered to come, she always found a reason to postpone. I'll call you tomorrow, Abigail, I repeated and hung up. The rest of the day is a mess. My routine is disrupted, my thoughts racing. During dinner, baked chicken and potatoes always on Tuesdays, I ponder the situation. Abigail and her family have never taken much interest in me, but they're my family, my blood, and now they're in trouble. I pull out a scrapbook of photos. Here's Abigail as a child with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Here she is graduating from college, one of the few moments I've seen the pride in her eyes as she looks up at me. Here she is with Hugh on their wedding day. I remember paying for most of this wedding, even though traditionally it was the bride's parents who had to do it. But Hugh's parents insisted on an expensive venue, a gourmet menu, and I didn't want my daughter to feel disadvantaged. After 9 p.m., the time I usually get ready for bed, I call my financial advisor, Paul Jenkins. Eugene, he exclaims in surprise. Is everything all right? You never call this late. I'm sorry to bother you, Paul, I say. I need to know how much I can withdraw from my accounts without incurring a significant loss. Withdraw? He interjects. Are you talking about a large sum of money? Yes, I answer. Very large. We discuss my finances and I learn that I can withdraw a substantial amount without serious tax consequences. Betty wouldn't approve. It's our airbag, Eugene, she'd say. But Betty is gone, and I have a decision to make. The next morning I call Abigail. I'll help you, I say without preamble, but not with $5,000. What do you mean? I can hear the wariness in her voice. I'll buy you a house, I say. Not for rent, all of it. No mortgage. The silence on the other end of the line lasts so long that I start to think I've lost the connection. Dad, she finally says, are you serious? I'm always serious when it comes to money, Abigail. You know that. But, why? She asks. It's a lot of money. Because you're my family, I answer simply. And I have that money. I've been saving all my life for something important. It's important. This time I hear her crying, not theatrically, but quietly, discreetly. Thank you, Daddy, she says. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I say. Find a suitable house and I'll arrange for an agent to buy it. Over the next few days, Abigail sends me pictures of the houses she and Hugh are looking at. I look through them with pencil in hand, making notes on potential problems: roof, wiring, foundation. Hugh calls me once, awkwardly thanks me, and quickly hands the phone back to Abigail. His pride is hurt, that much is obvious, but this is no time for pride. 2 weeks later, they find the house. It's 3 stories, 4 bedrooms in a nice Bridgeport neighborhood. I inspect it with the inspector and give my approval. The price is high, almost all of my savings, but the house is worth it. Sturdy, well-built with new electrical wiring, a house that will last. The day I sign the papers, I meet Abigail at the realtor's office. Hugh is absent, a business meeting, Abigail explains, though we both know it's an excuse. I sign the papers, hand over the check, and hand Abigail the keys. This is your home now, I say. No payments, no mortgage, just property taxes and utilities. She hugs me for the first time in years. Daddy, I don't know how we'll ever be able to thank you. Just be happy, I reply, and maybe have me over for dinner sometime. She nods, wiping away her tears. Of course, Daddy, whenever you want. Returning home, I feel strangely empty. My bills are almost empty. Enough left over to live comfortably, but nothing more. No excesses, no major purchases in the future. But I have no regrets. After all, what else is money for if not to help your loved ones? Rachel calls this evening. I heard the news, she says. You bought Abigail a house? News travels fast in Bridgeport. Yes, I reply. They lost their previous one. Eugene Kennedy, she says with a soft reproach in her voice. You are the most honorable and most stubborn man I know. I'm just doing what I have to do, I reply. It's nothing special. It is special, Eugene, she insists, especially considering how they've treated you all these years. I don't say anything back to that. Some things are better left untold. Before I go to bed, I look at the picture again. Me, Betty, and little Abigail. Happy times, simple times. Maybe buying this house is my way of getting some of that happiness back. Maybe now Abigail will realize that I always wanted only the best for her. Maybe now we can start over. I go to bed with a sense of accomplishment, not out of love or affection. Those feelings are all but gone after so many years of neglect. But out of a sense of responsibility. I've always honored my obligations, to my employers, to my clients, to my family. It's a principle I've lived by my entire life, and today I followed it again. Betty always said I took too long to make decisions, but when I did, I acted swiftly. And that's exactly what happened with Abigail's house. After a sleepless night and agonizing deliberation, I firmly decided that I would help my daughter. In the morning, I called my financial advisor, Paul Jenkins, and set up a meeting for the same day. Paul's office was located in downtown Bridgeport, a glass building overlooking the bay. I always felt uncomfortable in places like that. Too bright, too noisy, too many young people running around with coffee in their hands. Eugene, have a seat. Paul pointed to the leather chair across from his desk. He was in his early 50s, but in his gray suit with a fashionable narrow tie, he looked younger. I have to say, your call surprised me. You're talking about withdrawing almost all of your savings? That's right. I nodded, straightening my back. My daughter and her family lost their house. I want to buy them a new one. All of it, no mortgage. Paul looked at me carefully over his glasses. Eugene, do you realize that this will have a significant impact on your financial situation? You'll have enough money left in your account for about 5 to 7 years of your life, taking into account your current expenses and health insurance. I've done the math, Paul, I said, pulling a folded sheet of paper out of my shirt pocket. If I save money on a few things, I can stretch that money out over a longer period of time, and I'll still have my pension and Social Security. Paul sighed, ran his eyes over my calculations, and shook his head. Eugene, I understand that you want to help your daughter, but maybe you should consider other options. For example, you could help them with a down payment on a mortgage. No, I cut him off. Hugh lost his job. There's no telling when he'll find a new one or if he'll ever find one. They won't get a mortgage. I've made up my mind, Paul. My counselor knew me well enough to know that it was useless to change my mind. He nodded and began the necessary paperwork for the withdrawal. As I left the office, I headed for my car, but suddenly stopped in front of an electronics storefront. The big TV was showing the news. The announcer was talking about the rising real estate prices in Bridgeport. The housing market is booming, she said with a smile, as if it were good news. For those who already owned real estate, perhaps it was. For everyone else, including my daughter, it meant even greater challenges. I got in the car and dialed Abigail's number. Daddy? Her voice sounded wary, like she was expecting bad news. I've arranged everything with the money, I said. Now we need to find a realtor. Do you have anyone in mind? Actually, she perked up a little. Nancy Ward, she helped us with our last house. She's very nice. All right, give me her number, I said, and tell me what neighborhoods you're considering. Abigail was silent for a moment. Well, we were thinking Willow Creek or maybe Highland Park, she finally said. I raised my eyebrows involuntarily. Those were the most expensive neighborhoods in Bridgeport. Abigail, I said slowly, I'm willing to buy you a nice house, but let's be realistic. Willow Creek and Highland Park are very expensive neighborhoods. But you said you'd buy us the whole house, she said, a touch of hurt in her voice. I thought that meant... It means a house without a mortgage, I interrupted. But not a palace. Let's look at something in Riverside or Oak Valley. Dad, but Christian goes to school near Highland Park, she said, and all his friends live there. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Christian, my 15-year-old grandson, whom I'd only seen a dozen times in his entire life. Not because I didn't want to see him more often, but because Abigail always found reasons to postpone it. Okay, I gave up. I'll see what I can find in Highland Park, but I can't promise I'll be able to afford the most expensive options. Thank you, Daddy. There was genuine joy in her voice. I'll call Nancy right away. The next day, we met Nancy Ward's realtor at her office. She was an energetic woman in her 40s with a short haircut and a piercing gaze. She quickly assessed the situation and seemed to know immediately who she was dealing with. So, Mr. Kennedy, you're looking for a home for your daughter and her family, she said, looking at something on her clipboard. There are several good offers in Highland Park right now. What kind of budget are we looking at? I named an amount. Nancy frowned slightly, and Abigail looked disappointed. That limits our choices, Nancy said diplomatically. But let's see what we can find. We spent the next 2 weeks looking at houses in Highland Park and the surrounding neighborhoods. I scrutinized each option, checking the wiring, the condition of the roof, the foundation. Abigail looked more and more annoyed with every question I asked. Daddy, this is a modern house, she hissed, as I checked the wiring in one of the houses. There's nothing wrong with this place. Abigail, I've been designing electrical systems for 40 years, I replied. I've seen enough new houses with terrible wiring. On the 5th day of the search, Hugh joined us. He was a tall, trim man with carefully styled dark hair and a perpetually condescending smile. Even now, having lost his job and his home, he managed to look like he was doing us a favor by spending his valuable time looking at houses. Eugene. He held out his hand for a handshake. Abigail told me about your generous offer. I could hear the slight awkwardness in his voice. His ego was clearly hurting from having to accept help from his retired father-in-law. "I'm happy to help," I replied dryly. We looked at the four-bedroom house on Oak Street. The house was decent, with a large backyard and sunny rooms, but it was on the outskirts of Highland Park. This neighborhood is considered part of Highland Park, but technically it's already Riverside, Nancy explained. "It's too far from Christian school," Hugh said immediately. "It's only 15 minutes by bus," I countered. "Eugene." Hugh put his hand on my shoulder, and I could barely keep it from dropping it. "Kids from good families don't take the bus these days. We always drive Christian to school ourselves." I stayed silent, but inside I was seething. When Abigail was a teenager, she'd bike to school in rain, in snow, in heat, and nothing. She'd grown up to be a normal person. Well, at least physically healthy. The next day, Nancy showed us a house on Maple Avenue in the heart of Highland Park. It was 3 stories with 4 bedrooms, a home theater, and a pool in the backyard. The price was well above my budget. "A beautiful house," Nancy said, "but unfortunately not in your price range, Mr. Kennedy." "It's perfect," Abigail exhaled as she walked around the spacious kitchen with marble countertops. "Daddy, look at this kitchen. And Christian could invite his friends over for a home theater." "Abigail," I shook my head, "this house costs 30% more than we planned." "But you could—" she started. "No," I cut her off. "I can't. It's my life savings, Abigail. Every last dime." Hugh, who had been looking around the garage, returned with a satisfied smile. "Double garage with heating," he announced. "Perfect for my BMW." "What are you going to do with your BMW when the bank takes it?" I asked, sharper than I intended. Hugh's smile faded. "Eugene, I appreciate your concern for our finances, but I assure you I'll find a new job soon. Probably even better than the last one." "And while you're looking for it, you're living on my money," I said. "Daddy!" Abigail exclaimed. "Don't start." Nancy tactfully stepped aside, pretending to study the built-in bookshelves. "Excuse me." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Let's get back to the question of the house. This one's too expensive. Period." Hugh and Abigail glanced over, and I saw a silent communication between them that made me feel redundant. "Why don't we look at the next option?" Nancy suggested, coming back to us. The next was a house on Elm Street, on the border between Highland Park and Oak Valley. Smaller than the previous one, but still with 4 bedrooms, a decent-sized backyard, and, importantly to me, new wiring. The price was almost within my budget. "This house needs some cosmetic repairs," Nancy explained, pointing to the worn wallpaper in the living room, "but structurally it's in great condition, and the neighborhood is nice." I toured the house from top to bottom, checking the pipes, electrical wiring, attic, basement. Everything was in decent condition, not perfect, but livable. "I like it," I finally said. "What do you think?" Abigail exchanged glances with Hugh. It's not bad," she said uncertainly, "but the kitchen is so small, and the master bedroom doesn't have a walk-in closet." "And the neighborhood isn't exactly upscale," Hugh added. "That could affect Christian's prospects. You know how important social connections are at his age." I took a deep breath, trying to contain my irritation. "The house is in good condition, in a good neighborhood near Christian school, and I can afford it. What else do you need?" "Dad, we're very grateful," Abigail took my hand, "but we're thinking about Christian's future, his opportunities." "I'm thinking about a roof over your head," I said. "A place for you to live while Hugh looks for work. If you want something better later, you're welcome to buy it yourself." There was an awkward pause. Nancy stepped delicately aside again, studying the kitchen cabinets. "All right," Abigail said at last. "Let's take this one." The buying process took another 2 weeks. I insisted on a thorough home inspection by an independent inspector, which irritated Abigail and Hugh once again. "Dad, we're wasting time," Abigail said when I reported the results of the roof inspection. The bank could foreclose on our current house at any moment. I'd rather lose a week than buy a house with a leaky roof, I replied. The day of signing the papers was rainy. I arrived at Nancy's office 15 minutes early, as usual. Abigail and Hugh were 20 minutes late. "Sorry, Dad," Abigail said, shaking the raindrops off her coat. "Traffic." Hugh didn't even apologize, just nodded at me and went straight into a conversation with Nancy about the finer points of the contract. I sat in the leather chair, watching my brother-in-law waving his arms around, explaining something to the realtor. He always liked to hear his own voice. Even now, when I was giving almost all of my savings to save his family from homelessness, he held himself as if he were doing everyone a favor by his presence. Abigail sat down next to me, nervously rubbing the strap of her designer bag. I noticed that despite their financial problems, she still wore expensive clothes and a fresh manicure. "Thank you, Daddy," she suddenly said quietly. "I know it's a big sacrifice on your part." I looked at my daughter. In that moment, she reminded me of myself as a child, the same uncertain smile, the same eyes she'd inherited from Betty. "I'm doing this for you and Christian," I answered. "Not for him." I nodded toward Hugh. Abigail sighed. "Papa, please. Hugh is doing his best. He's really looking for a job." "I hope so," I said. "Because after this purchase, I won't have any more money left to save you." Nancy called us over to the table to sign the papers. I pulled a checkbook out of my inside jacket pocket, an old-fashioned paper checkbook. Hugh rolled his eyes but said nothing. "So, Mr. Kennedy, you're buying this house outright, mortgage-free, and deeding it to Mr. and Mrs. Taft," Nancy summarized. "That's right," I confirmed, writing a check for the huge sum. "Great," she smiled. "Congratulations to all of you." I handed the keys to Abigail. "This is your home now." She took the keys and smiled slightly. "Thank you, Dad." No hug, no tears of gratitude. Just a "thank you, Daddy," and a slight smile. Like I'd bought her a new dress, not a several $100,000 house. Hugh shook my hand, his handshake weak and perfunctory. "Much appreciated, Eugene," he said with the same condescending smile. "We won't forget it." Already forgotten, I thought, watching as he and Abigail discussed what furniture they would buy for the new house. "I was thinking about a new couch for the living room," Abigail said as we walked out of the office. "The one we saw at Macy's, remember?" "Sure, honey," Hugh put his arm around her shoulders. "We'll buy anything you want." I stopped on the porch of the office building, watching them walk to their car, an expensive sedan they probably wouldn't be able to afford anytime soon. The rain intensified, drumming on my old hat. They didn't even turn around to wave at me. Back home, I sat in my chair and stared at Betty's picture for a long time. What would she say about my decision? Would she approve of such a waste of money on a daughter who wasn't even truly grateful? "You did what you thought was right, Eugene," she would say. "As you always do." 3 days later, Abigail called and invited me to dinner at the new house. I accepted, though I didn't feel particularly enthusiastic. I spent a long time deciding what to wear before going out, settling on my only decent suit that I'd only worn to funerals and weddings. Abigail's new house looked settled, even though they'd only moved in 2 days ago. The living room already had the new couch Abigail had mentioned, and there were paintings on the walls. "Do you like it?" Abigail asked, walking me through the house. We had almost unpacked everything. "It's very nice," I said, noting to myself that they seemed to have spent a lot of money on new furniture despite the lack of a steady income. Hugh appeared from the kitchen with a glass of whiskey. "Eugene, welcome. What are you drinking?" "Water, thank you," I replied. "I'm driving." He grinned. "One drink won't hurt, but whatever you say." Christian, my grandson, reluctantly came down to dinner after Abigail's several urgings. He'd grown since the last time I'd seen him, and was now taller than me, a lanky teenager with perpetually slumped shoulders and eyes fixed on his smartphone screen. "Hi, Grandpa," he mumbled, not taking his eyes off the phone. "Hello, Christian," I said. "How was school?" "Fine," he answered, and then turned to his mother. "Mom, can I eat in my room? I have a history project." "Of course not," Abigail said. "Grandpa came to visit and we're all having dinner together." Christian rolled his eyes but didn't argue. The dinner was a tense affair. Hugh talked about prospective job interviews, Abigail about plans to renovate the house, and Christian silently picked at his plate, occasionally furtively checking his phone under the table. "So, Eugene," Hugh said, filling his glass with wine for the third time, "what do you think of our new house?" "It's a nice house," I replied. "Sturdy. It'll last a long time." "Yes, but the atmosphere, the style," he said, turning his hand around the room. Abigail had hired a designer to get it just right. I almost choked on my water. "A designer?" I questioned, looking at my daughter. "You hired a designer when you didn't have a steady income?" Abigail looked embarrassed. "Dad, it was a discount. She's a friend of mine." "And yet," I shook my head, "I thought it was more important to save money now." "Eugene," Hugh interjected with that condescending smile I hated so much, "I understand your concern, but I assure you we are in control of our spending, and as I said, I have some promising suggestions." "That's fine," I said. "Which ones?" Hugh hesitated. "Well, I don't want to jinx it, but a major financial company has expressed interest." I nodded, not believing a word of it. After dinner, when Christian had gone to his room and Hugh had gone to take an important call, Abigail and I were alone in the kitchen. She did the dishes, I did the wipes. "Do you really think this is the time to spend on designers?" I asked quietly. Abigail sighed. "Daddy, I know you're worried, but we'll get through this. Hugh is really close to getting a new job." "I hope so," I said, "because I've given you practically all my savings." She turned to me, her eyes gleaming. "I know, and we're grateful, really, but you can't keep reminding us of that. It's humiliating." I felt a twinge of resentment inside. "Humiliating?" I asked again. "Humiliating that I reminded you of my help? Not that you spend money on designers and new couches when one of you is unemployed." "Dad, please." Abigail lowered her voice. "Hugh will hear." "So?" I lowered my voice too, but I didn't tone it down. "Will his pride suffer? What about my money, Abigail? The money I've been saving all my life?" "You offered to help," she reminded him. "We didn't ask you to buy us a house. You asked for $5,000 for rent," I countered. "But I decided to do more, and you know why? Because you're my family. And I thought family appreciated help, not humiliation." Abigail lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. That's not what I meant. We appreciate your help. We really do. It's just, this is a difficult time for all of us." I nodded, not wanting to continue the argument. "Yes, a difficult time." As I left, Abigail gave me a quick, formal hug goodbye. Hugh shook my hand, his fingers sticky with whiskey. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "And for the invitation." "Be sure to stop by again," Abigail replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I got in the car and took a long look at their new house, the house I'd bought with almost all of my savings. A warm light burned in the windows, and Hugh's laughter came from the doorway. They had already returned to their lives in which there was not much room for me. The 2 months flew by. Since buying Abigail's house, I'd only seen her twice, a brief Sunday lunch and a fleeting encounter at the supermarket. Each time she was friendly but aloof, as if she were performing a mandatory courtesy program. There was hardly any news of Hugh. According to Abigail, he was in talks with several prospective employers, which I suspected was a euphemism for still unemployed. Today was Christian's birthday, 16 years old, an important date. I'd received a formal invitation by email. Abigail had insisted I start an email account like all normal people, a week before the celebration. The text was dry and businesslike, as if I was being invited to a corporate event rather than a grandchild's birthday party. Despite this, I prepared thoroughly. I chose a gift, an expensive wristwatch, classic, mechanical, the kind that lasts for decades, unlike the electronic trinkets that modern teenagers are fond of. I enclosed an envelope with a check, not too big but enough for Christian to buy something of his choice. The morning was cold. The October wind was fluttering the last leaves on the trees when I left the house. I put on my only decent suit, the one I'd bought 8 years ago for Abigail's wedding. It had gotten a little loose. I was losing weight with age, but it still looked decent. The drive to Highland Park took about half an hour. I rarely drove out to this neighborhood. Too pretentious, too expensive for my taste. The houses here looked like illustrations from glossy magazines, with immaculate lawns and ornate facades. The house I'd bought for Abigail was one of the most modest on the street, and still cost a fortune. I parked in front of their house at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the time specified in the invitation. There were several cars already parked in the driveway, all considerably more expensive than my old Ford. Before getting out, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes. Betty always said I had the eyes of a man who thought too much and enjoyed too little. She was right. With the gift in hand, I walked to the front door and rang the bell. From inside came voices and music. The party was in full swing. Abigail opened the door a few seconds later. She looked elegant in a dark blue dress, with a new haircut and flawless makeup. No sign of the financial difficulties she'd spoken of 2 months ago. "Daddy," she said without much enthusiasm, "you're on time." "I'm always on time," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine I'd bought especially for the occasion. "Happy birthday to Christian. Is he home?" "Of course," she accepted the bottle, barely glancing at it. "Everyone's already here." I took a step toward the door, but Abigail didn't step aside. Instead, she looked at me with some strange expression, a mixture of confusion and determination. "Daddy, before you go in, pay," she said, and her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. I froze, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" "We charge admission," she explained, pointing to a small basket by the door that I hadn't noticed right away. It contained several bills. $50. It's for Christian's present. We're saving for a new laptop. I stared at the basket, then back at Abigail, trying to comprehend what was happening. "You're kidding, right?" I asked, though I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't a joke. "Daddy, it was Hugh's idea," she said quietly, as if she didn't want anyone inside to hear. "All the guests are contributing. That way we can buy Christian a really nice present. I already have a gift for Christian," I showed the wrapped box with the watch, "and a check. Quite generous, I must say." Abigail crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture I remembered well from her teenage years. It was what she always did when she was preparing for a confrontation. "That's great, Dad, but the rules are the same for everyone. $50. Rules?" I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me. "You're talking about rules? In the house I bought?" "Don't start, please." Her voice became harsher. "I knew you'd react this way, always making a big deal out of everything." "Everything?" I felt my voice rising and made an effort to speak quieter. "Abigail, I gave almost all of my savings to buy you this house. I literally went broke for you. And now you're asking me to pay to get in? For God's sake, Dad," she rolled her eyes. "It's just a birthday tradition. You're always so dramatic." "Dramatize?" I couldn't believe my ears. "You want to know what's really dramatic? The fact that I, a 72-year-old man, gave everything I've saved up all my life to save my ungrateful daughter and her unemployed husband from homelessness. That's what's dramatic." Abigail's face contorted with anger. "No one asked you to buy us a house," she hissed. "We asked for a loan for rent. It was your idea to buy a whole house and then insult us about it every chance you get." "I'm not," I countered. "I just expected a basic thank you, or at least not to charge me money to enter the house I'd bought. Oh, that's it. She leaned closer. You didn't just buy a house. You bought the right to control us, to dictate how we live our lives. You always have. What? I was genuinely stunned. What are you talking about? All my life, Dad, she continued, her voice laced with resentment. All my life you've controlled everything. What school I should go to, what subjects I should study, who I should be friends with. Even when I grew up, you always knew better. Always had an opinion about my work, my relationships, my decisions. I gave advice, I said, feeling a heaviness growing in my chest. Because I cared about you. No, Dad, you didn't give advice. You passed judgment. You were always unhappy with my choices. You always thought I was doing something wrong. I fell silent, trying to comprehend her words. Was that really how she'd perceived my concern all these years? I always wanted the best for you, I said quietly. Always. The best by your standards, she replied. But you never asked me what I wanted. At that moment, Hugh appeared in the doorway. He held a glass of something that looked like expensive whiskey and smiled his usual indulgent smile. Ah, Eugene, he exclaimed. At last! Christian has been asking about you already. I seriously doubted that my grandson had even noticed my absence, but I remained silent. Did Abigail explain our rules to you? Hugh continued, pointing to the basket. It's a small donation for a shared gift. Everyone participates. Yes, she did, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. And I decline. Hugh's smile became strained. I'm sorry? I said I'm withdrawing, I repeated. I have my own gift for Christian, and I'm not going to pay to enter a house I bought myself. Hugh exchanged a quick glance with Abigail, then turned back to me. Eugene, I realize you've helped us with the house, and we're very grateful. But you see, this is our home now, and we make the rules. All the guests have contributed. It would be weird to make an exception. Even for the man who literally gave you a roof over your head? I asked. Especially for him, Hugh replied. Otherwise, it would look like we owe him something. You do owe it, I said, feeling my insides boiling. Several $100,000 to be exact. Hugh's face darkened. That's low, Eugene. It's very low to bring up money on a day like this. Remind me of money? I couldn't believe my ears. What's that? Charging me a cover charge? It's a birthday tradition, Abigail interjected. And it's only $50, Dad. Don't make a tragedy out of it. I looked at my daughter, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. She was standing next to Hugh, and their shoulders touched in silent unity against me. Her face, once so like Betty's, now seemed alien. There was no warmth or understanding in her eyes, only irritation and a kind of tired condescension, as if I were a capricious child and not her father. Suddenly, I realized that there was a gulf between us that was much deeper than I had realized. Years of misunderstandings, unspoken resentments, different expectations, and that chasm could no longer be bridged by money, houses, or even the most sincere apologies. You know what? I said, taking a step back. I'm not going to be a part of this. In what this? Abigail asked defiantly. This farce, I replied. You invite me to your grandson's birthday party and then you demand an entrance fee to the house I bought, after all I've done for you. Dad, if you don't want to pay, just leave, Abigail said. Don't ruin Christian's party with your scenes. I'm not going to, I replied. Tell him that for me. Tell him that his grandfather wanted to congratulate him but couldn't pay the entrance fee. I put the gift on the porch and turned to leave. Dad, wait, Abigail's voice softened. There's no need to be so dramatic. If it's really that important to you, you can enter for free. I stopped and turned around slowly. Free? I interjected. Like a favor? Thank you, but no. Eugene, be reasonable, Hugh intervened. It's only a birthday party. Let's not make trouble out of nothing. It's not an idle problem, I replied. The problem is that you don't appreciate at all what I've done for you. You treat me like an ATM machine instead of a father and grandfather. That's not fair, Abigail argued, but there was no conviction in her voice. It's fair, and you know it, I said. When you needed money, you remembered me. And now that you have the house, I'm a liability again. You've made yourself a nuisance, Hugh snapped at me, always reminding me of your great favor. I gave him a long look. You know, Hugh, I've never said this, but I've thought from the beginning that you didn't deserve my daughter. And today, you've only confirmed my opinion. Hugh's face flushed with anger. How dare you? Enough, Abigail interrupted him. Both of you. People will hear. I looked at my daughter again. She was more worried about what the guests would think than what was happening between us. Don't worry, I said quietly. I'm leaving. And I won't interfere any more with your perfect life in the house I bought. Daddy, please. A note of pleading came into her voice. Don't go like this. Let's talk later when everyone's gone. There's nothing more to talk about, I replied. Everything had become very clear today. I turned and walked to my car, feeling their stares on my back. I got in, but I didn't start the engine right away. I needed a few minutes to calm down. My hands were shaking, not from old age, but from anger and resentment. Through the windshield, I watched Hugh pick up my gift from the porch and carry it into the house. Abigail looked in my direction for a few seconds, and then she was out the door. I started the engine and drove slowly away from the house. In the rearview mirror, I watched the building that had cost me almost all of my savings and, as it turned out, the last vestiges of my relationship with my daughter shrink. The drive home seemed endless. I replayed our conversation over and over in my head, every word, every look. I tried to figure out where and when things had gone wrong between me and Abigail. Maybe she was right. Maybe I really was too controlling of her. Maybe the money for the house wasn't an act of caring, but an attempt to regain control. But even if there was some truth to what she was saying, demanding money from me to enter the house I'd bought seemed like an incredible display of ingratitude. It was more than I could bear. Back home, I sat in my chair and stared at Betty's picture for a long time. What would she say? She'd always understood Abigail better, always been able to find a way to approach her. If Betty were alive, maybe things would have turned out differently. I ran my hand over my face, feeling the fatigue come in waves. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my age. Not physical. I'd always taken care of my health, but emotional. Fatigue from misunderstanding, from dashed hopes, from the realization that my own daughter saw me not as a loving father, but as a source of money and problems. The phone rang several times throughout the evening, but I didn't answer. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to decide what to do next. One thing I knew for sure, something in our relationship with Abigail had irrevocably changed tonight. The line had been crossed, the words had been spoken, and there was no taking them back. I stood up, walked to the window, and took a long look at the darkening sky. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would meet it as I had met every day of my life, with a straight back and a raised head. But today, just today, I let myself feel the depth of resentment and disappointment. That night I barely slept a wink. I tossed and turned in bed, replaying our fight with Abigail over and over in my head. Every word, every look, every gesture, it all seemed so painfully clear in the darkness of the bedroom. Maybe I really had been too hard on her as a child. Maybe I had pointed out mistakes too often and not praised her enough. Betty always said I was too demanding of my daughter, but I believed I was preparing her for real life, where no one would pat her on the head for mediocrity. I got up early, as usual, at 6:30 despite a sleepless night. Old habits die hard. Brewed some coffee, drank it while looking out at my neat backyard. The day promised to be clear but cool, a typical October in Bridgeport. At 8, the phone rang. I thought it might be Abigail. Perhaps she'd decided to apologize for yesterday. But it was Rachel, my neighbor. "Eugene, good morning." She sounded unusually excited. "Have you seen the morning news yet?" "No," I answered. "I don't turn on the TV in the morning. What's wrong?" "Oh, Eugene." She paused. "There's a police operation in Highland Park. Your brother-in-law was on, Hugh. I think he's been arrested." My heart skipped a beat. "What? When?" "Early this morning. SWAT, police, the works. Some big financial investigation," they said. I thanked Rachel and immediately turned on the TV, flipping through the channels looking for news. The local channel was showing a report from Highland Park. The camera captured a group of men in suits and body armor that said FBI, leading someone in handcuffs out of the building. I couldn't make out a face, but the figure definitely resembled Hugh. The announcer was talking about a major operation to stop a financial fraud scheme, referring to global investments and grand theft. The name of the company sounded familiar. Hugh had worked there before he was fired. Without finishing the report, I grabbed my car keys and ran out of the house. The drive to Highland Park had never seemed so long. On the way, I tried calling Abigail, but the phone was unavailable. As I pulled up to their street, I saw a police cordon. Several patrol cars were blocking the driveway, and an officer was stopping all approaching cars. I parked on the next block and approached on foot. Abigail's house was surrounded by police tape. An official seal and notice hung on the door, which I couldn't read from a distance. Several vans with the logos of various law enforcement agencies were parked nearby, and people in uniform and plain clothes were going in and out of the house, carrying boxes of documents and electronic equipment. Neighbors gathered in small groups at a safe distance, whispering and pointing out what was happening. I noticed several journalists recording stand-ups for the evening news. "Excuse me, sir," a policeman called out to me as I tried to move closer. "This area is closed to the public." "My daughter lives in this house," I explained. "Abigail Taft. I want to know what's going on." The officer softened but remained adamant. "I understand your concern, sir, but I can't let you through. If you're a relative, you can go to the operation headquarters." He pointed to a van marked Mobile Command Center. I headed there, but before I could get there, I heard a familiar voice. "Dad!" When I turned around, I saw Abigail. She was standing on the sidewalk on the other side of the street holding Christian's hand. Both of them looked shaken, disheveled in their homemade clothes, eyes red from crying. I quickly crossed the street. "Abigail, what's going on?" She hugged me with unexpected strength, pressing her face into my shoulder. I felt her trembling. "They took Hugh," she whispered through her tears. "They broke in at dawn with guns and masks, like he was some kind of terrorist. Christian was so scared." I patted her back gently, feeling uncomfortable with this sudden display of affection after last night's fight. Christian stood nearby, staring at the ground. He seemed smaller and younger than his 16 years. "Let's get out of here," I suggested, noticing the curious looks of the neighbors. "You can explain everything to me in the car." We reached my old Ford and I opened the doors for them. Abigail sat in the front seat, Christian in the back, still not looking up. "What happened?" I asked once we were in the relative silence of the cabin. Abigail ran her hand over her face, smearing the remnants of last night's makeup. "I don't know all the details," she began. "Around 5 in the morning there was a knock on the door, very loudly. Before we could realize anything, they broke down the door and burst inside with guns, yelling at us to get on the floor." She paused, trying to deal with her emotions. "They went straight to Hugh, handcuffed him. Then they showed him some papers, a search and arrest warrant. They talked about fraud, money laundering, not paying taxes. I didn't understand a thing. Hugh was yelling that it was a mistake, that they had no right." "Where is he now?" I asked. "They took him away. Didn't say where. Some agent gave me a business card, said to contact their office later." She pulled a crumpled card out of her pocket and showed it to me. It had an FBI agent's name and a phone number on it. "What about the house?" "We were told to leave it." They said the house was sealed as part of the investigation, and we couldn't go back there until the investigation was over. Abigail started crying again. They wouldn't even let us take anything but what we were wearing. All of our belongings, documents, money, everything was left there. I looked at Christian in the rearview mirror. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, the only thing he'd apparently managed to grab. "Christian, are you okay?" I asked softly. He looked up, his eyes red with dark circles under them. "I'm fine," he mumbled. "His friends have already seen the news," Abigail explained quietly. His phone was bursting with messages. I nodded, realizing how humiliating this situation must be for a teenager. Yesterday he was celebrating his 16th birthday in a luxurious home, and today his father was arrested in front of the entire neighborhood. "What are you going to do?" I asked, starting the car. Abigail looked at me with hope and despair. "Daddy, I have no one else to turn to. We need help, money for a lawyer for Hugh, a place to live. I don't know what to do." I pulled onto the main road, heading for my house. There were conflicting feelings fighting inside me. On the one hand, it was my daughter and grandson in trouble. On the other, the bitterness of last night's scene still lingered, and the thought of Abigail coming to me only when she needed money again was a muffled irritation. Had Hugh explained what he was being accused of? I asked, trying to speak calmly. Abigail shook her head. He said it was a mistake that he'd been set up. Mentioned his former boss, Richard Kane. Something about Richard using him without initiating him into the details of the scheme. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Typical Hugh. Always someone else's fault. "What do you think?" I asked. She shrugged, looking completely lost. "I don't know, Daddy. I really don't. Hugh always handled the finances. I never really got into it. He brought in the money. We lived well. I didn't ask questions. We pulled up in front of my house. Rachel was standing by her fence, clearly expecting us. But when she saw Abigail and Christian, she hid tactfully inside. Inside, I immediately put the kettle on. Betty always said hot tea was the best cure for shock. Abigail sat at the kitchen table and Christian sat on the living room couch, still on the phone. "Here." I placed a cup of tea in front of my daughter. "Drink it. It'll make you feel better." She clasped the cup with trembling hands but didn't take a sip. "Daddy, what should I do?" Her voice sounded helpless, like a little girl's. I sat down across from her, choosing my words carefully. "First of all, you need to get in touch with a good lawyer. Not the one Hugh suggests, but an independent criminal lawyer. If the FBI is running a major operation like this, they must have some serious evidence." "But lawyers cost so much," she moaned. "I don't have that kind of money. All our accounts are probably frozen." "What about your job?" I asked. "You have your own paycheck, don't you?" Abigail lowered her eyes. "Yeah, I quit 6 months ago. Hugh said his income was enough for us, and I could spend more time at home and with Christian." I struggled not to shake my head. Classic Hugh, convincing her to quit her job, making her completely dependent on herself. "I see," I said. "Well, you're going to have to get a job, as soon as possible." "A job?" She stared at me. "Dad, now is not the time to get a job. I have to help Hugh, to find Christian and me a place to live, to deal with this nightmare." "And all of that takes money," I pointed out. "Which you don't have." Abigail stared at me, slowly realizing where I was going with this. "Daddy," she said quietly, "you'll help us, won't you? You have savings, don't you?" I took a deep breath. "Abigail, my savings ran out when I bought you the house. A house that's now sealed by the FBI because of your husband's machinations. But you must have had something left," she insisted. "A pension, insurance, something." "Yes, I have a pension. Just enough for me to live modestly. Not enough for expensive lawyers and bail for Hugh." Abigail's face twisted with despair. "But what are we to do? Where do we go? You can't just turn your back on us." I felt anger rising inside, not fierce anger, but a quiet, cold, lingering anger. I can't turn away, I questioned. Like you turned your back on me yesterday when you demanded payment to enter the house I'd bought? Abigail flinched as if slapped. Dad, it was Hugh's stupid idea. I didn't want to argue with him in front of the guests. But you didn't mind when he suggested the silly idea, I remarked. You didn't mind when he said you didn't want to owe me anything. Well, congratulations. Now you really don't owe me anything. Tears rolled down Abigail's cheeks. You can't be so cruel. Not now. Not when we're in trouble. Cruel? I stepped forward. It was cruel to ignore me for years and then come for the money. It was cruel to accept a house from me and not show a single ounce of gratitude. It was cruel to humiliate me in front of all your friends by demanding an entrance fee. That's what's cruel, Abigail. I didn't mean to humiliate you, she whispered. I wasn't thinking. That's just it, I nodded. You didn't think. Not once in all these years have you thought about my feelings, about how it felt to see my only daughter drift away, how she looked at me with contempt, how she used me when she needed something and forgot when I was no longer useful. Abigail covered her face with her hands. I wasn't using you, Daddy. I didn't know any other way. You could have just been a daughter, I said quietly. Visit not just when you need money. Not just call me in a crisis. Let me be a part of your life, a part of Christian's life. Hearing my name, Christian looked up from the phone, showing interest in our conversation for the first time. Mom, he called out. What's going on? Abigail wiped away her tears. Nothing, honey. Grandpa and I are just talking. I stood up and walked over to my grandson, sitting down next to him on the couch. Christian, I said softly, your mom and you are going through a difficult time. Your father may have made some serious mistakes and now you will have to answer for them. But you are not to blame for what happened. Remember that. He looked at me surprised, as if seeing me for the first time. Can we stay here? He asked. At your place? I glanced at Abigail, who froze, waiting for my answer. For a few days, I said finally. Until your mom finds an apartment. An apartment? Abigail asked. Dad, I can't get an apartment right now. I don't even have the money for a deposit. You have jewelry, I pointed out. Your designer handbags, your watches. You could sell it all. She stared at me in disbelief. You want me to sell my stuff? I want you to start solving your problems on your own, I replied. You're a grown woman, Abigail, the mother of a teenager. It's time to take responsibility for your life. What about a lawyer for Hugh? She asked. I shrugged. He'll be assigned a public defender, or have his rich friends help him, the ones who were at the party last night and paid for admission. Abigail looked at me with a mixture of resentment and disbelief. I don't believe you're refusing to help your son-in-law. I'm not refusing to help my son-in-law, I objected. I'm refusing to help a man who probably engaged in fraud, risked the well-being of my daughter and grandson, and then had the nerve to charge me money to enter a house I bought with my last savings. There was a heavy silence in the room. Christian jabbed at his phone again, as if trying to hide from the tension between the adults. What are we going to do? Abigail finally asked, and there was real desperation in her voice. I sighed, feeling the fatigue come in waves. I already said, you can stay here for a few days. During that time, you'll get a job, sell some of your stuff to raise for a down payment on the rent. You'll get in touch with a lawyer who will help you understand your rights in this situation, and then you'll start to move on with your life, without the expensive cars, designer clothes, and other luxuries you're used to. That's impossible, she whispered. It's quite possible, I argued. Millions of people live like that. It's the way I've lived most of my life. Saving, cutting back, denying myself a lot of things to get you a good education and a head start in life. Abigail didn't answer, staring into the space in front of her. Her world was crumbling, and she didn't know how to deal with the wreckage. I got up and went to my bedroom, pulling the spare bedding out of the closet. "You can sleep in the guest room," I said when I got back. "Christian on the couch in the living room. The bathroom is at the end of the hall. The towels are in the closet." Abigail nodded mechanically. "Thank you," she said so quietly I barely heard her. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Abigail tried to call various people, her lawyer friend, Hugh's co-workers, some acquaintance who might be able to help. Judging by her increasingly desperate look, no one wanted to get involved with a man whose husband had just been arrested by the FBI for financial fraud. That evening, the television showed a report on the investigation. Hugh wasn't mentioned by name, but they talked about a massive fraud scheme and millions of dollars in damages. The familiar building of the company where Hugh worked and the police officers carrying out boxes of documents flashed in the frame. "Turn it off, please," Abigail asked, and I pressed the button on the remote. Before I went to bed, she came over to me as I sat in my chair, looking through an old photo album. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I know I've behaved wrongly, that Hugh and that I didn't appreciate everything you've done for us. I'm so sorry. I really am." I looked at her, disheveled, with eyes swollen with tears, in homemade clothes she would never have worn in public before. I hadn't seen her this vulnerable since she was a little girl. "I know," I replied. "But sometimes sorry isn't enough, Abigail. Sometimes it takes time to rebuild what has been broken." She nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand. But you're not going to leave us, are you? You're not going to kick us out?" I sighed. "I already told you. You can stay for a few days. But then you'll have to find your own place and learn to manage on your own. I can't, and won't, solve all your problems. But will you help us? At least with some advice?" I closed the album and stood up. "Advice, yes, but not money. Not for a lawyer for Hugh or a luxury apartment. You're going to have to reevaluate your ideas about what your life should look like." Abigail stood before me, broken and lost. Part of me wanted to hug her, to tell her that everything would be okay, that I would solve all her problems like I always had. But the other part, the rational, stubborn part, knew that would be a mistake. That sometimes loving meant letting a person face the consequences of their decisions. "Good night, Abigail," I said, heading toward my bedroom. "Tomorrow would be a new day, and we're all going to have to learn to live in a new way." I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of my decision. It was the right thing to do. I knew it with my mind. But my heart still ached for my daughter, who stood outside the door now, unable to understand how her perfect life had turned into ruins in one day. "I'm sorry, Betty," I whispered, looking at the picture of my wife on the bedside table. "I'm doing what I think is right, even if it's hard, even if she hates me." I lay down and stared at the ceiling for a long time before sleep finally took pity on me, granting me temporary oblivion from all the worries and regrets. April was surprisingly warm. I was sitting on the veranda of my house, enjoying the morning sunshine, when the mail arrived. Among the flyers and bills was an envelope with the official logo of the Bridgeport County Courthouse. I was in no hurry to open it. I had a rough guess as to what was in it. It had been 6 months since Abigail and Christian had shown up on my doorstep after Hugh's arrest. They had stayed with me for 2 weeks, the most intense 2 weeks I could remember. Abigail was constantly crying or on the phone trying to find a lawyer to take Hugh's case at a reduced rate. Christian barely left his room, refusing to go to school because of bullying and taunts from his classmates. Finally, Abigail found a cheap apartment in Riverside, a neighborhood she had previously considered insufficiently upscale. She sold most of her designer clothes, as I'd advised, to raise a down payment. She took a secretarial job at a small law firm that didn't pay much, but at least she wasn't looked down upon because of her husband's last name, which by then was still on the front page of the local papers. I helped them move in, bought a minimal set of furniture and dishes. It was the last thing I did for them. After that, our communication was reduced to occasional weekend phone calls, brief and awkward. Abigail gave updates on Hugh's trial, on her work, on how Christian was slowly getting back to normal. I talked about the weather, about my garden, about a new book I was reading. We had carefully avoided deep topics and memories of the past. Now I opened the envelope and pulled out the official notice. The house I'd bought for Abigail, which had been sealed during the investigation, had been seized by the state as property acquired with illegal proceeds. I was invited to appear in court if I believed I had rights to the property. I set the paper aside. Sure, technically I could try to get the house back, prove that I'd bought it with honestly earned money, that I didn't know about Hugh's machinations. But why? So I could sell it later at a loss? Or give it back to Abigail, who'd never learned to appreciate my sacrifices? No, this house was now part of a past better left behind. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. The number was unidentifiable. "Eugene Kennedy speaking," I answered. "Dad, it's me." Abigail's voice sounded tired and strained. "Hello, Abigail," I said. "How are you?" "Not so good," she paused. The trial was over. Hugh got 8 years. I wasn't surprised. From what the papers had said, my son-in-law was involved in a fraudulent scheme that had caused millions of dollars in damage to investors. 8 years seemed too lenient a sentence. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't really sure I was truly sorry. I never liked Hugh, and by the looks of it, he deserved his punishment. "He says it's unfair," Abigail continued, "that his boss only got 5 years even though he was the mastermind behind the whole scheme. Hugh was just following orders, typical of Hugh. Even now, he refused to take responsibility." "How did Christian take the news?" I asked, more concerned about my grandson. He's fine, I guess. We don't talk about it much. He's finally making new friends at school, doing better in school. I don't want to ruin everything again." "That's the right thing to do," I approved. "He needs stability now." There was a pause during which I could hear Abigail breathing deeply as if gathering her strength. "Daddy, I'm in trouble," she said finally. "I got fired." "Fired? Why?" "The firm's losing clients. They decided to downsize and I was made redundant. They said I was the last one in, the first one out." "I see," I said. "Are you looking for a new job already?" "Yes, but—" She stopped talking again. "It's not that easy. The Taft name isn't very well received in Bridgeport right now, especially in legal circles." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Reputations are fragile things, especially in small towns where everyone knows each other. "You could use your maiden name," I suggested. "Kennedy doesn't conjure up the same associations." "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but it wouldn't solve all the problems. The rent's gone up. Christian needs money for college in 2 years. I don't know how I'm going to manage on my own." I knew what she was getting at. Money again. Always money. "Abigail," I said softly but firmly, "I told you 6 months ago. I don't have a lot of savings. All I have is a house and a modest pension." "I know, Daddy," she replied quickly. "I'm not asking for money. I'm not. I thought maybe Christian and I could move in with you for a while, until I find a new job and get back on my feet." I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. Abigail and Christian in my house. Again. The endless phone calls, the tears, the tension, and there was no telling how long it would last this time. "Abigail," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I think you should look for other options. Maybe a smaller apartment in a different neighborhood?" "Dad," I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I literally have no other options. I've called everyone I know. No one can help." "What about your friends?" I asked. "The ones who were at Christian's birthday party? The ones who paid admission?" Abigail made a sound like a bitter laugh. "They're gone, Daddy. All of them." As soon as Hugh was arrested, they stopped answering the phone. No one wants to mess with the wife of a convicted crook. I sighed. The world can be a cruel place when luck turns its back on you. I knew that better than most. I need to think about it, I said finally. Give me a couple days. Okay, Dad. Her voice brightened a little. Thank you. Really, thank you. After the conversation, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the light spring wind sway the branches of the apple tree Betty and I had planted 30 years ago. What would she say now? Would she advise me to let my daughter and grandson back into the house, to give them another chance? Or would she agree that sometimes you have to let go, let people go their own way, even if that way leads through hardship? That evening I called my financial advisor, Paul Jenkins. Eugene, his voice sounded surprised. It's good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Paul, remember when we talked about how I should invest in real estate, a small apartment to rent out? Of course I remember. It's still a good idea, especially with rent prices going up. What if I sold my house? I asked. How much would I be able to get for it in the current climate? Paul whistled. Your house, but you always said you'd never sell it, that it was a memory of Betty. Circumstances change, I replied. So how much? We discussed the details. My house, despite its age, was in excellent condition and in a good neighborhood. I could get enough for it to buy a small apartment for myself and another for rent. Plus, there would be enough left over for something I had long dreamed of but had always put off. The next day, I called Abigail. I've been thinking about your request, I said without preamble. What did you decide? Her voice sounded tense. I've decided to sell the house, I said. What? She clearly hadn't expected that. Why? You always said you'd never sell the house. Because it's time for a change, I explained. I'm buying 2 apartments, one for myself, a smaller one, and the other to rent out. For rent? She asked me. But what about Christian and me? You can rent this apartment from me, I said, at below market value. It would be my contribution, but you'll pay the rent properly. It will teach you responsibility and self-reliance. There was a long pause. I could almost hear Abigail struggling with conflicting emotions, relief that I would help, and disappointment that it wouldn't be as much as she'd hoped. Thank you, Daddy, she finally said. That's very generous of you. One more thing, I added. I'm going to use some of the money from the sale of the house to travel. Travel? She was surprised. Where to? Europe, I replied. Italy, France, Spain. I've always wanted to see the Colosseum, the Eiffel Tower, the Sagrada Familia. Your mom and I dreamed of going there after I retired, but then she got sick and, well, I decided it was time to make that dream come true, while I still can. Alone? Abigail asked with a note of concern. Alone, I confirmed. It's for the best. We agreed to meet in a few days to discuss the details. When I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd shrugged off a weight I'd been carrying for years. The sale of the house took less time than I expected. The real estate market in Bridgeport was booming, and my well-maintained house with a beautiful garden attracted several potential buyers. A month later, the deal closed, and I received a check for more than I expected. The condo purchase went smoothly, too. For myself, I chose a small but bright apartment in a new building with an elevator and a good view from the window. For rent, a larger one in a neighborhood with good schools, considering Christian. Abigail and Christian moved into their new apartment at the end of May. I helped them with furniture and the first month's rent, but made it clear that from there on they should manage on their own. The rent will be 2/3 of the market price, I explained to Abigail as I handed her the keys. That's my contribution, but I expect the payments to come in on time. She nodded without looking me in the eye. Of course, Daddy. I understand. And also, I added, I want Christian to come to see me once a week, for dinner or just to talk. I want to get to know my grandson before it's too late. Abigail looked up at me in surprise. Is that really what you want? He's not the most talkative teenager. I know, I smiled. "But he's my grandson, and I want to be a part of his life, even if you and Hugh didn't really want it before." She lowered her eyes, accepting the fairness of the rebuke. "All right, Daddy, I'll tell him." In June, I set off on my journey. Before I left, I stood for a long time in my new apartment, looking at Betty's picture, which, as usual, I had put in the most prominent place. "Well, old girl," I said to her, "we are going to Europe after all. It's only a pity you'll only see it through my eyes." 3 weeks in Europe was a revelation to me. I, a man who had never left the United States, suddenly found myself among the ancient ruins of Rome, the majestic cathedrals of Paris, the bustling markets of Barcelona. I was eating strange food, drinking local wine, talking to people who barely understood my English, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Every night I wrote down my impressions in a small notebook I had bought especially for the trip. Sometimes I added sketches, inept but sincere. I wasn't sure who these notes were meant for. Maybe to Christian when he was older. Maybe just to myself, to reread on long winter evenings, remembering the sunshine of Italy and the cool breezes of the French coast. Back in Bridgeport in early July, I felt like a different person. It was as if a part of the old, stubborn, resentful Eugene Kennedy had remained somewhere in the narrow streets of Florence or in a cafe in Montmartre. The first Sunday after my return, Christian came to my house for dinner, as we had agreed. He was still as silent as ever, but occasionally looked up from his phone and asked questions about my trip. I showed him pictures and told him about the Roman catacombs, which particularly impressed me. As he left, I gave him an envelope. "What is this?" he asked suspiciously. "Open it at home," I replied. "And don't tell your mother until you decide for yourself." In the envelope was a check for what should have been enough for the first year of college. Not the full cost. Christian would still have to work part-time or take out student loans, but substantial help. I didn't want his parents' mistakes to deprive him of an educational opportunity. Abigail called the next day. "Daddy, Christian showed me the check," she said without preamble. It's very generous. But are you sure?" "Absolutely," I replied. "It's my gift to him. Not to you, not to Hugh, to him. So he can have a chance at a better life than you." Abigail was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Thank you. Forgive me. For everything." I didn't answer, not because I hadn't forgiven her. In a way, I'd done that a long time ago. It's just that some things are better left unspoken. Some bridges can't be completely rebuilt, even if you stop setting them on fire. Another 2 months passed. I was getting used to life in my new apartment, making new rituals, new acquaintances. On Sundays, Christian came to my house for dinner, sometimes alone, sometimes with Abigail. Our conversations remained superficial, but without the tension of before. We were like neighbors gradually getting to know each other, not like a family that had broken its ties and was now trying to rebuild them. At the end of September, I received a letter from Hugh, the first one I had received since his incarceration. He wrote about how unfairly he had been treated, how he missed his family, and how he planned to start over after his release. In the last paragraph, he asked for money for a defense fund, some legal organization that could supposedly help him get out sooner. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my notebook of European notes and started planning another trip. This time to Asia, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, countries I'd read about but never dreamed of seeing, until recently. Rachel, my former roommate who now often stopped by for tea, asked if I wanted someone to keep me company on this trip. "Traveling alone at your age," she began anxiously. "At my age," I interrupted her with a smile, "a man already knows what he wants, and I want to travel alone, Rachel, to see the world through my own eyes, to make my own discoveries, to be free." She nodded understandingly, though I could see she didn't quite agree. That evening, sitting on the balcony of my new apartment and watching the sunset over Bridgeport, I thought about the past 6 months, about the house I'd bought and lost, about the daughter I may never have truly known, about the grandson I might yet get to know if I was lucky, about money spent and saved, lost and gained. I had no regrets, not for buying a house for Abigail. It was an act of love, even if she didn't appreciate it. Not for refusing to help Hugh. It was an act of justice he deserved. Not about selling his old house. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for the future. The sun was slowly disappearing over the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of orange and purple. I watched this spectacle with a sense of profound peace. At 73, I had finally learned the most important lesson of all: to live for myself, without expecting gratitude, without demanding love, without clinging to grudges. "See, Betty?" I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear. I had learned after all. As the last ray of sunlight disappeared over the horizon, I went back to the apartment, turned on the light, and opened my laptop. It was time to book my tickets to Tokyo. A new life awaited me, and I was ready for it like I'd never been before.